Thank you very much, Rebbe Yedid. And thank you to Jack Carey. Didn't get an introduction for all of his work and his volunteerism as well. My name is Maury Litwack, and I run the National Teach Network, which spans now 7 states and represents 90% of the yeshiva world around the country. 6 months ago, I was at a simcha for a close friend of mine, and it was for his daughter. He just had a baby, and his eyes were welled up with tears. And I said, "Oh, this is great, tears of joy." I went over to him, and I said, what's happening? And it was anxiety. It was anxiety. You could feel it. And he told me he was anxious because this is his 3rd child, and he didn't know how he was going to be able to afford tuition. That it was a bracha, but he didn't know. Anxiety. 1 week later, when I gave a speech like this, a grandfather, came up to me and said, "Tuition crisis? I've liquidated my retirement savings in order to pay for my grandchildren. I've liquidated my retirement savings." Every person here has a story like this. Every single person. You're either telling the story at your Shabbat table, you're sharing it with your spouse, we're murmuring about it, or we're thinking about it. Tonight, we're presenting a solution. A solution that is about direct aid into the hands of parents. A solution that is about government funding. A solution that can help make our schools, our yeshivot, better, safer, and more affordable. And it's not theoretical. You're going to hear tonight, it's not theoretical. It's happening. It's happening in places like Pennsylvania, blue states, and in Florida, like Jack mentioned. It's not theoretical. The idea of government funding is not a new idea. We know it's not a new idea because in Eretz Yisrael, every time someone makes aliyah, what's the first thing they talk about? Not paying tuition. Tuition's gone. You talk to people in Europe, the United Kingdom, other countries. They don't talk about a tuition crisis because the government in those countries pays for both public and private school education. Only in America is there a tuition crisis. Only do we have meetings like this because the government has decided with its great unfairness that our children are not worth their time. Only in America. But our parents and our grandparents have been working on this for a long time. It's not news. In the 1950s, after the Holocaust, yeshivot in America, like Rabbi Yedid talked about, we fight for them despite the Holocaust, despite what happened. We fight to bring life and to build our systems. And there were 10,000 yeshiva kids in all of America in the 1950s. And it was working. But in the 1960s, there were 75,000 yeshiva students. 75,000. People started getting worried. And they said, we need to pay for it. Maybe the government is an answer. And incredible leaders and rabbanim and individuals, you can read volumes, books about them, went out there and they lobbied people like President Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, who was talking about education for all Americans. And what about our kids? And Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and individuals you may know because they were fighting in the 1960s, and they were successful. They got transportation, the busing that takes our kids to school, and other services for our kids, critical things. But it was elusive. The big idea of getting funding directly in the hands of parents is something we've been working on 60s, 70s, 80s. How do we get this done? In 1997, the Federation put out a study about the tuition crisis. And they called it tuition crisis because it was the first time it was publicly labeled that. They said it's killing our families. It's seared into my brain, the study, because I've read it. And it sounds so familiar. It says 2 things. Number 1 is it's pricing out families from giving their kids an education, a Jewish education. We know in this community how no kid is deprived of that. But in other communities around the country, like Rabbi Yedid said, people don't have to send their kids to public school. And they were talking about 1997. And the other thing it said was how it was preventing people from having children. Preventing people from having children. Now just imagine that. That's 1997. You could write that today. And they said that the solution is government funding. Government funding. And what happened after that? Very little. Very little to solve that problem and deal with it in 1997. But after the financial crisis in 2008, a group of trailblazers showed up. Members of the SY community, people in Brooklyn and people in Deal, and I'm just going to mention a couple because they're literally right in the front row. People like Sammy Sacca in Deal and people like Jack Carey. Individuals around the room, and there's a lot of them, so I apologize, but they're right. They sat in the front in the sand, and I got to mention them. So those people who were with us from the beginning, and they said, you know what we want to do? We want to do what AIPAC does, and the AARP, and the NRA. We want to do what they do. What do they do? What's special about those three organizations? They're single-issue advocacy organizations. The AARP fights for seniors and only seniors. AIPAC fights for Israel and only Israel. And the NRA fights for gun owners and only that. Where was that for Jewish education? Where was that for the yeshivot? These trailblazers created that organization and said, we're going to create a single-issue advocacy organization. Very bold move that had never been done before. What do you do in politics if you decide we're going to go in ambitious and do this? For those who don't understand politics, politics is one rule, very one rule. And here's the rule, and you'll hopefully remember. It's a very simple rule. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. That's it. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. That's how politics works. Very simple idea. Let me give you an example of this. I live in North Jersey, and my roads are very bumpy on my block. 2 blocks over, they're paved beautifully. I've been to the parks in Brooklyn. I like the parks in the Bronx better. I think they're better parks in that borough. The taxes are higher in the city than they are in Nassau County. What's the difference between all these things? There's a limited budget, a limited pie that has to be divided, policy and money. And those who fight for it and are at the table are there. And on my block, they didn't fight to remove the speed bump, the potholes, I don't even know what to call them, the craters. They didn't do anything to do that. So their issue got eaten while others ate. That's politics. This is the world that they arrived at, these trailblazers, to say, okay, how do we do this? And what happens when you're trying to come to a table? We're all invited to Shabbat. A lot of it's to our friends, but maybe you don't know the area. How do you come to a table for the very first time? You need directions. So these individuals went out and they hired people who knew the directions. They hired lobbyists. Lobbyists know the halls of power, and they find the best lobbyists. Lobbyists who represented Uber at the time, and casinos, and business, and yeshivot. Literally, you could see and yeshivot. All of a sudden, they had to learn about yeshivot and introduce us to the individuals who were serving the food. What else do you do when you're trying to eat at the table? I'll tell you what you do. I'll tell you what you don't do. What you don't do, and we all have this, is I have 4 kids and my wife, and imagine a situation where I'm going to a new family, and my wife says, oh, I don't feel like going. Or 2 of my kids say, I'm not going. I say, what do you mean? We have to go. So now it's me walking with one kid's back, screaming, or whatever it is. I show up, and they're like, where's everybody else? I don't know. Achdut, unity. In Trenton and Albany, they don't care what kind of kippah I wear. They don't care about SY versus J-Dub. They don't care, conservative, modern Orthodox, yeshivish, Hasidish. They don't care and know these things. They do know that if we don't show up together as a family, it means something. So we organize, and if you see this invitation, it's every yeshiva represented, which is a big deal to bring everyone together when you're at the table. And finally, when we got to the table with our family and we're sitting there, there's 2 kinds of people at the table. There's individuals that say, hey, there's someone at the table. Let's give them something to eat. And there's individuals who say, we're not giving you anything. Separation of church and state. I don't agree with you. I don't believe in it, etc. And what do you do then? What did these trailblazers do when they were starting to teach? What did they do? Well, you have 2 choices. You can ignore them and just go along your way, or you can respond. And those who are giving you something, they responded and publicly thanked them, because most of us don't know who our elected officials are. How many people here know who their local and state and assembly and city council members are? Raise their hands. How many people can name them? Probably one of the biggest groups ever, and I think it was our 12 hands. And then there's other individuals who we weren't going to thank, who said, no, you don't deserve that. And so we went out publicly and we said, this is unfair, and we named names. I'm not getting fed. It's not fair. And we did this with Governor Christie. We did this with Mayor de Blasio and a lot of other politicians around the country. And there's a reason why I don't get invited to that many Hanukkah parties anymore. But it was effective. It worked. For example, in New York, they gave us $9 a kid in security funding. And we were through the moon. They gave us $9 a kid. $25 a kid in security funding in New Jersey. Because when we were at the table, we saw they were giving money to public school kids and charter school kids after all the terrible school shootings in the country. And we said, what about our kids? And they gave us something. And we said, wow, that's something. Something. An appetizer. Something. And then it continued. My daughter needs more help in the classroom. I have another child who has other needs in the classroom. When I lived in Maryland, I have to pay out of pocket for that. In New Jersey, because of the work of Teach New Jersey, I don't have to pay for that. In New York, we literally have people who help our kids to learn to read and services and everything because of the work that was being done there. And so finally, we're getting appetizers. And then we got a bowl of soup, a little bigger meal. For example, there was a big push being made to provide STEM education for every single kid in New York and New Jersey because the Amazon jobs and the Google jobs and the Facebook jobs pay a lot more money than other jobs. You need to be trained and educated in that. And so in New York, we generated $250 million in funding, $250 million in funding from scratch for this. And in New Jersey, we created a program where public school teachers leave the school day at 2:30 and they go and they teach after-school programs, other programs in yeshivot all over New Jersey. In Teaneck, in Lakewood, here, Hillel, Elon, free teachers. Last year, as Jack mentioned, we generated $40 million annually for our yeshivot in Deal and in Brooklyn. Just your yeshivot, even more for the rest of the community. Do you know what kind of endowment you would have to create in order to generate a $40 million return? I'll tell you. You'd have to raise $300 million a year to generate $40 million. Government funding is the largest contributor to yeshiva education in New York and New Jersey by a mile. The largest. Because it's the only outside government dollars coming into our community. The only one. The only dollars you don't have to raise. But we're not here for appetizers. We're not here for soup. I'm hungry. I want steak. I'm hungry. I like a good steak. I'm tired of our elected officials saying that we'll get around to you. I'm tired of our elected officials saying that we're not a priority or they don't agree. Non-public schools in New Jersey represent 10% of the population that receive less than 2% of the funding. In New York, it's 17% of the population and yet receive less than 2% of the funding. It's unfair. But factors are changing. The world is moving at an unbelievable speed around us. 3 years ago, something called COVID happened, and the world was shook because schools closed down, and America and the press woke up to the fact that people were not educated for a year and a half. Detrimental. And so they said, this is crazy. What are we doing? Private school, public school. They started thinking. 13 months ago, the Supreme Court passed a law of the land saying it is unconstitutional to leave out religious schools when you're providing funding. You cannot exclude them and say, no religious schools. It's wrong. You can't exclude them. We have the moral authority of the Supreme Court now as well. And finally, as Jack mentioned, 3 months ago, Teach Florida passed into law a bill to provide $8,000 per child for any child, regardless of income. If I move to Florida, my 4 kids, I will have a $32,000 in an account that I can use regardless of my income I'm making. I can use it for scholarships. I can use it for tuition. I can use it for textbooks. I can use it to save for money for college. Game changer. Absolute game changer. I got an email, a text I got a text from a group of Venezuelan parents who literally said that if it's true, they're going to move their kids from public school into a yeshiva. And it's happening. Schools are building up there. People are moving there, relocating. And it happened in Pennsylvania, like I mentioned as well. First, there was an income cap. Now they're proposing universal income in a blue state. Why not New Jersey? Why not New York? Tell me why it's not possible. Some people may say to me, they're concerned, separation of church and state, legal issues. I told you about the groundbreaking decision in the Supreme Court. Others may say, red state, blue state. I could show you Pennsylvania, I could show you Florida, I could show you states around the country. Something's happening, something's in the air, something's changing. We have an ambitious plan to make this happen. We've doubled our fundraising in order to make it happen. We've reached out to Catholic partners who are with us on this and other faith-based partners on this. Business leaders. We've met with public schools, charter schools, others in the education space. We have an ambitious plan to get this done. And our plan is not $8,000 a child. It's higher because it costs more to live here in New York and New Jersey. I know I pay over $100,000 in tuition myself. The only thing missing is the secret sauce. We have the plan, raising the money. We need the secret sauce. You see, what Audrey didn't mention is that in Florida, they tripled voter turnout, tripled it from where it was previously. Supermajority now votes. They call them super voters in Florida. So much so that Governor DeSantis, when he was first elected, one of the first places he went was a yeshiva in Florida. You may didn't know that. One of the leading presidential candidates, one of the first places he went was a yeshiva because he knew who voted for him. In New Jersey, a legislator told me how he has in his pocket, he carries during session, a list of the 3-4 biggest priorities he has to work on based on who voted and what do they care about, because he wants to get reelected. This is the language that politicians speak. It's great that we have a seat at the table. It's great that we're in the political world. But our seat is still too small because politics speaks numbers. And the numbers we're competing with are beyond easy for us to win. For example, one of the biggest spenders in New York and New Jersey is the realtors, those people who sell your houses. They're one of the biggest lobbying spenders and activist groups there. And they number their membership at 110,000. Our yeshiva children in New York and New Jersey are over 200,000. So don't tell me we can't win there. Let me give you another group. The trial lawyers are often getting more money than we are for a lot of the programs. Trial lawyers. No offense to any trial lawyers here. Trial lawyers. 3,500 in New York and New Jersey. 3,500 in New York and New Jersey. Surely we have more teachers than that here. Finally, my favorite, there's 30,000 plumbers in New York and New Jersey. And they're doing better than us many times. Plumbers. How many members of our community are graduates of yeshiva, parents and grandparents that could exceed that number? But yet when we ask our community if they voted, or if they know who they voted for, or why they voted, the answer is too low. When we ask our community who represents them and how often they've heard from you, the answer is too low. But they're hearing from plumbers. They're hearing from trial attorneys. They're hearing from realtors, but not our community the way we need it to. We're sending Teach NJ and Teach NYS into the treacherous world of politics, the treacherous waters of politics, to compete with other big boats, other big individuals with numbers, and people fill like cruise ships full of people. And we're sending them in with a creaky rowboat. Maybe. A lot of times it feels like we're sending this advocacy organization in with a guy with floaties on, hoping he swims and competes with everybody else. Jewish education is a multi-billion enterprise that's a lifeblood of our kids. And this is how we're treating it. Because we're not voting. Because we're not active and saying to our politicians, am I on your list? We could change that tonight. This is a very simple proposition we're asking people to do. There's an advocacy vehicle called the Teach Action Fund, which is literally a vehicle that'll help you to remember to vote. It'll help inform you on candidates and issues. It'll help you keep invested in what your elected officials are saying and how they're saying it, and you can respond to them and you can deal with it like all those other advocacy groups we're talking about. We're only asking for a few minutes of your time, a minute to vote, a minute to remind your friends, etc. There's gradations here. There's levels here. If you like what you're hearing, the minimum is signing up. That's the absolute minimum. If you feel like you want to do more than that, we need people who are going to meet with their elected officials. If you feel like you want to contribute to it, great, you can contribute to it. If you feel like you want to lead the effort and be a Ralph Hannon and go do that, we need your help in doing that. Call them. But it's things like reminding your 10 and 15 members of your block to vote. Reminding them to show up and knock on the door of the elected officials. But I want to conclude with the following. Things are happening much faster than you think they may happen, okay? The pie is getting smaller. Last year, because we weren't at the table as much as we could, the New York and New Jersey politicians proposed $700 million in Hollywood film and TV tax credits. Double the amount of money they gave to non-public schools. Double. Netflix and HBO did better than your local yeshiva. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. How much are they going to eat next year of us? How much? People are moving to Florida. People are moving to Florida. If New Jersey passes it, people are going to move from New York to New Jersey. If New York passes it first, people are going to move from New Jersey to New York. It's happening. And finally, just think of your descendants, of your children and grandchildren. They're going to ask you, how did you solve one of the biggest issues in the community? How are you a hero? And you're going to look back at them, down at them, and you're going to say, it was simple actions, like showing up at the DSN Beach Club. Simple actions like signing up. Simple actions like voting. Simple actions like asking where were 10, 15, 100 other people here to fill these seats. That changed the world forever. That removed one of the greatest crises and issues in our community forever. And resolved it. That's it. I appreciate each and every one being here. If you're motivated, sign up, come reach out to us. The minimum you can do is be part of it and do it. The maximum you can do is go talk to 10, 15, 20 of your friends and tell them to sign up and be part of this. Thank you all.